Thanks,
Todd.
Ari. Thanks for your time.
No, thank you. And we just know how crazy this moment is and how hard you guys are working right now, literally around the clock. Let's just kick off, things with you here. We'll sort of back up in a moment when Carole joins us. Can you sort of talk a little bit? We've heard over the last few days, conversations around crypto and what is potentially the role of crypto for sanctions evasion in the Russia sanctions context. Can you sort of talk through your thinking and the thinking of the U.S. Treasury Department?
Yeah, and thanks for the opportunity again, Ari. Really appreciate it, because there's been a lot in the news cycles about Russian invasion potentially moving towards cryptocurrency, and there's a lot to unpack there. And Treasury is obviously staying on top of the situation and will respond as the situation evolves as needed. But let me start with more of a kind of macro overview. There's a liquidity problem from the perspective of the central bank of Russia, in the event that it does make any sort of effort to use crypto to evade sanctions. So Russia, first of all, is, and I'm sure everyone on the call knows, is a G20 fiat-based economy, and now the ruble is at a record low. So over the last few years, Russia has worked to bolster the ruble and build up its reserves. They have not focused on building the rails needed to support crypto or DeFi innovation. In fact, they've shown signs of being reticent to move that direction over the last 2 years while they built up their own internal reserves. And you contrast that with the last decade of the U.S. private sector doing innovation in this particular space. And after hundreds of billions of dollars, many firms in this space, we're still very much in our early stages of adoption at an economic scale level. So point being, you can't flip a switch overnight and run a G20 economy on cryptocurrency. Big banks, and again, it goes back to the liquidity problem. Big banks in an economy need real liquidity, and conducting large scale transactions in virtual currency is likely to be slow and expensive. Use of virtual currency to purchase goods or services also requires then at some point conversion back to fiat currency through the use of financial institutions that, of course, are then subject to strict international anti-money laundering standards. And so for the central bank of Russia to use crypto assets in this way, it would have already had to have developed a large stock of crypto assets, or the ability to use its reserves to buy crypto assets. And as I mentioned publicly earlier this week, we did not see an uptick that one would expect in the crypto markets in the lead up to the sanctions actions last week. But the sanctions imposed on the central bank of Russia appear to have, for practical purposes, left the central bank with very limited usable reserves for intervention. So if the central bank of Russia was able to use its reserves to buy crypto assets, it's an access problem, it's a rails problem, and it's just a basic liquidity problem. The liquidity doesn't exist right now in the crypto market. So significant challenges. Plus, they would also have to find a counterparty, which would be very, very difficult in this climate at the macro level. So that being said, we did see a bit of an uptick earlier this week in the crypto markets, but that was also timed with the Russian government banning foreign currency conversions for its citizens. Plus, we all saw those photos of runs on ATMs from Russian citizens, lines around the block in Moscow. So one would suspect ordinary Russian citizens may have been looking for an alternative to the ruble, and we were thus witnessing a retail spike, especially at a time when Central Bank of Russia is trying to stabilize its ruble, right? And the retail asset flight might actually not be particularly helpful to the CBR in that case.
So Carole, thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us. And, I said earlier, we understand sort of the nature of this moment and how busy one is literally running around the halls of the White House and the Treasury Department. So thank you really for joining us. I'm going to sort of back up a moment. We sort of talk about, I think, the cryptocurrency conversation, if any here. Would you sort of level set for us for a moment, sort of like, what have we seen over the last, few days in terms of sanctions? From my perspective, what has happened in the last week, typically takes years to occur when you're talking about comprehensive sanctions of this kind. Sort of what is Russia facing today, and sort of what are the ways that the White House, the NSC, the Treasury Department are thinking about continuing to ratchet up sanctions?
Thanks so much, Ari, and appreciate yours and everyone's patience with me and trying to get connected on the network. So I think that the reason why we've been able to see such comprehensive and coordinated action in a way that, as you mentioned, normally might take a lot of time is that this is such an egregious violation of international law. So it requires a really coordinated and comprehensive approach to be able to hold accountable these actors. So the United States, along with allies and partners, we have imposed severe and immediate economic costs on Russia in response to Putin's war of choice against Ukraine. These actions include sweeping financial sanctions and stringent export controls that are designed to inflict maximum pain on Russia's economy, including by curtailing their access to cutting-edge technology. Russia will end up further isolated from the global financial system because of these choices. We have targeted Russia's top 10 largest financial institutions and imposed unprecedented export control measures, cutting off Russia's high-tech imports. We also recently, 2 days ago, in coordination with allies and partners, imposed additional economic costs on Russia and Belarus in response to President Putin's brutal invasion of Ukraine and continued hostilities there. We will take actions to continue to hold Belarus accountable for enabling Putin's invasion of Ukraine and weaken the Russian defense sector and its military power for years to come, target Russia's most important sources of wealth, and ban Russian airlines from US space. So we imposed sweeping restrictions on Belarus to choke off its import of technological goods in response to its support of Putin's war of choice, imposed full blocking sanctions on Russian defense entities, as well as export controls targeting oil refining, a key revenue source that supports the Russian military.
Carole, thank you so much. And sort of staying with you for a minute, the other, I think, piece of this, not only sort of the really debilitating sanctions and the aggressiveness of the sanctions, but also sort of the global response here. You mentioned partners and allies a number of times. That is truly an extraordinary moment. I mean, there seems to be no room in the world between, the US and partners in terms of these sanctions. Am I reading that correctly?
No, yeah, you're definitely right. That it's critical to note the fact that we're not taking action alone, and international partnership is key to hold actors like Russia and Putin accountable. And that is exactly what we've leveraged here at an unprecedented level in response to their unprovoked aggression towards Ukraine. So we've welcomed commitments and actions by partner nations like Australia, Canada, the EU, Japan, UK, all taking similarly forceful actions to hold Russia accountable. So our actions in response to Putin's threatening actions will devastate Russia's ability to access global markets, to attract investments, and utilize the US dollar. We're unified with our partners completely and will continue to impose costs to suppress Russia's economic growth, increase its borrowing costs, raise inflation, intensify capital outflows, and erode its industrial base. I'll also mention on the point of international partnerships that really working together on anti-money laundering controls to ensure that there are sufficient controls across the cryptocurrency community to make sure that there is an ability to detect when there's illicit finance happening or sanctions evasion or offsetting activity that's occurring. The greatest vulnerability in the cryptocurrency ecosystem right now is the absence of sufficient implementation of AML controls internationally, usually due to the absence of sufficient AML regulatory and enforcement regimes to apply to virtual asset service providers. So to combat that, we will continue to work with international partners to take swift action to try to implement the AML regimes and make sure that we have the partnerships in place to be able to detect and interdict any illicit finance.
Carole, thank you so much. And sort of Todd, going back to you, I think that obviously your comments were pretty fulsome around the views around about sort of the use of crypto potentially for large scale sanctions evasion. Anything sort of to add to sort of Carole's comments there? It seems to me that the real focus then is to this, illicit underbelly, right? The non-compliant piece of the otherwise overwhelmingly licit crypto ecosystem.
Yeah, and Ari, thanks for giving the opportunity to clarify, because it isn't particularly concerning from that macro central bank running a G20 economy level. It still is concerning from a much more micro perspective in terms of attacking the assets of the oligarchs and the Putin inner circle. But this isn't new to us, Ari, and Carole knows this well from her time at FinCEN. I know you know this from your time at Treasury. Treasury's been working in this particular sphere, targeting Russian elite assets, going back to almost a decade now from the initial Crimea invasion. And then we followed up with an oligarch action targeting multiple oligarchs several years later. So we do know a little bit about how this regime likes to evade sanctions and move money. And we have a significant toolkit at our disposal now to tackle that. But let me kind of back up even further and just walk folks through what Treasury has learned about how this regime does like to layer its assets and move money. So first of all, they have a long and extensive playbook to launder money. And at the center of their playbook is their web of international corporate registrations and use of front companies and front persons. If you look at the initial Crimea designations that Treasury issued back in 2014, a couple of years later, rounds of oligarch designations, the Russian cronies are really adept at creating complex layers of international front companies, leveraging family members and front persons. They're also really adept at conversion to other assets, including gold and foreign currencies, which is to really hammer home Carole's point. That's why the multinational sanctions effort has been so instrumental. So is crypto potentially part of their playbook? Certainly there's going to be an element that's part of their playbook, but it frankly isn't at the top of their list. And I'll remind you that OFAC's first sanctions designation targeting a crypto exchange was SUEX back at the end of 2021. SUEX was registered in Czech Republic, but it did operate primarily out of Moscow, right? And make no doubt about it, that was a criminal exchange. Did our sanctions work in that case? Use your tool area at TRM. Look at the liquidity charts for SUEX in the year and a half leading up to the sanctions designation action. They moved in total 1.6 billion, 800 plus in, 800 plus out in the year and a half leading up to the sanctions designation. The month that they were designated by OFAC, they moved $13,000, and now they don't move anything, right? So sanctions work in the crypto ecosystem. Treasury is going to use the tools that it currently has at its disposal, which are sufficient to tackle this problem, and we're going to stay on top of it, and we're going to continue to have more actions in this space to make sure we are completely squeezing their ability to move assets.
Todd, thank you so much. Carole, I want to dig in on sort of a couple of things you said around what crypto businesses can do potentially to harden defenses against sanctions risk. But really quick question, you had mentioned sort of really extraordinary export controls. Sort of what makes them sort of extraordinary, and sort of what are the things that what's sort of happening in that space? Obviously, there's a lot of focus on sanctions, but you particularly mentioned exports. So thought like just a second sort of or two on expounding on that. And you're on.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Sorry. It's just limiting Russia's access and Belarus's access to highest end, technological imports. Being able to choke off that touch point for them to major sources of innovative technologies like American markets and companies is going to have like potentially devastating impacts on their economy for years to come, and will continue to impose those costs as needed. More broadly, on what the cryptocurrency sector can be thinking about what to do in this space, it's as with any technology financial system, it can be exploited. Of course, I appreciate Todd's points, especially about the fact that cryptocurrency exploitation is, based on the current conditions of the market and liquidity that's available, potentially not the primary tool. We definitely see that, but also hear the point that it is a part of a suite of options and something that we need the cryptocurrency sector to be able to guard against. So we need the cryptocurrency space to recognize the fact that implementation of anti-money laundering controls and working together to leverage partnerships and liability protections to share information to identify these illicit financial trails, working with regulators and FinCEN, the Financial Intelligence Unit, and OFAC to identify this illicit activity, report it with all relevant and available information, trying to proactively seek out where those finance trails might be, in fact, to touch points back with some of the actors that we have designated and associated with other illicit activity, like looking at the import and export controls and considering what kinds of red flags would help them understand if cryptocurrency is being used to support purchase of any of those types of technologies. Those are the kinds of things that the cryptocurrency sector, as well as the regular financial sector, can also look out for.
Terrific. Yeah, no, thank you so much for that clarification. And I think obviously, so many of the folks online, and we have hundreds today, are from the cryptocurrency industry. And I think it's really helpful to hear the importance of compliance, which I think is folks have known for a long time, but it's good to hear it today. Todd, sort of moving away from crypto for a moment into sort of the cyber space. Obviously, this is a unique war in many respects. I think arguably it started potentially, depending on how you think about this, with cyber attacks a few weeks ago. And obviously cyber is going to play a huge part in this conflict and sort of the way Russia reacts likely to the rest of the world and to these sanctions. Would you sort of talk about the sort of cyber piece of this a little bit?
Yeah, and frankly, from SolarWinds to Log4j, SolarWinds about a year and a half ago, Log4j over the holiday season at the end of 2021, the sector has really been in a state of heightened alert for some period of time now. And I do worry about burnout, not only for Treasury's own security operations center staffing, but the whole sectors, plus the CISO and CIO communities across the whole sector. We've just gone through a lot of significant vulnerabilities over the last a year and a half, and now we're facing this particular challenge. And actually, I think this is an area where crypto space may have an operational resilience advantage in terms of resilience of payments infrastructure over some of the larger, more established organizations. But I do remain concerned that Treasury's role leading the sanctions effort may make Treasury and or the U.S. financial sector a target for cyber attack. And to mitigate this threat, we have significantly increased the pacing of intelligence sharing across the sector to get tactical cybersecurity data in the hands of the CISOs and CIOs in as close to real time as possible. And we're in complete lockstep with DHS, CISA, with FBI, with Secret Service, and have real-time sharing capabilities with the sector that the U.S. government is collectively working as a collective unit. And I've also been ensuring then that the information reaches the crypto sector CISO teams that also need that type of tactical intelligence. At Treasury, over the last several months, we've worked tirelessly to implement multi-factor authentication, higher levels of encryption across our entire enterprise, while also updating our incident response playbooks and backup comms plans. And this perhaps, unfortunately, area is going to be the new normal for an extended period of time. So I think that's why, going back to how I started, we have to also kind of make sure we're pacing our staff using threat intel information to make sure that we're sharing as quickly as possible with the private sector what we're seeing on the government side.
Terrific, thank you.
Okay, I just want to.
I was going to ask Carole, just as a jumping off point, I think Todd did mention the focus was on the government there, the government response, but obviously the White House is thinking a lot about private sector too. But I'm sorry, jump on in on this. This is your wheelhouse.
Yeah, well, no, yeah, I just wanted to foot stomp the incredible work that Todd and the Department of the Treasury has been doing on the cybersecurity front and responses more broadly to incidents that have been, targeting U.S. government, but also critical infrastructure. So all of that is something that I really wanted to just underscore and double tap that point for the cryptocurrency sector, which I know has faced challenges with cybersecurity over many years. There's a lot of resources out there. The Office of Cybersecurity and Critical Infrastructure Protection is an incredible partner, and lots of others at the Department of Treasury that can help them understand where cybercrime is targeting their institutions and what they can, what kinds of best practices that they can leverage to be able to better detect and prevent that. So definitely encourage that, and looking at places where the best practices, like in the cyber EO that the president issued last summer, that listed out a lot of key actions that the agencies for the U.S. government are taking. Those same actions can do a lot to prevent significant cyber attacks against your institutions and exchanges. So I just wanted to, again, give a shout out to the incredible work at Treasury, and also point to the fact that there's a lot of resources about the kinds of measures that you can put in place to defend against cybercrime.
Yeah, no, I mean, what's really extraordinary is that it's not only interagency, but it seems like it's a truly global response, and you guys are really at the forefront of leading it. So thank you for that. Look, I couldn't be more grateful and appreciative to have you both on today. Let me just sort of leave you with this. This is a unique opportunity for the private sector, for the cryptocurrency industry, to hear directly from you. And there was a lot of salient points made here. If there was sort of one today that you want to ensure folks go home with, really sort of understand, what would those or that point be? Todd, let's start with you.
Yeah, I mean, it's just that and I'll just speak for Treasury. Carole has a broader view, obviously, than I do for the whole government sector. But I think Treasury just blows away the misconception of kind of the lazy government employee we have, specifically OFAC, the Office of Foreign Assets Control. Very, very small team that's really punching way above their weight here and working weekends, 14, 15, 16-hour days is the norm now and has been, frankly, for the last several months. So I want everyone to know that you have a very dedicated staff at Treasury who's going to use fact-based approaches, who are going to just stay after this and making sure we're squeezing off every sort of avenue that the adversary attempts to use to evade sanctions here. And we do have the toolkit to do that. We have the experience to do that. We're going to stay on top of it, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you so much, Carole.
I guess I'll underscore the role that the cryptocurrency sector really plays in trying to combat this activity as well as other illicit activity like ransomware activity. You guys are on the front lines of this activity. You are the institutions that are potentially being exploited, and these actors are looking for places that are easy to exploit in order to facilitate movement of those proceeds. You are the people that are best positioned to detect and then report this activity and help us to interdict it and prevent it in the first place. So you are a critical part of this fight. We really appreciate working with you and partnership there. And we just really encourage that the entire cryptocurrency sector, and not just the exchanges, also sanctions obligations like what Todd and I spoke to, do not just apply to financial institutions. They also apply to all U.S. persons. So I would encourage all components of the cryptocurrency ecosystem to refer to OFAC's enforcement guidance about potential implications and compliance in the cryptocurrency space. So I just wanted to highlight there that think very hard about your role in potentially either enabling or being able to combat illicit finance. You are critical partners for us, so please consider what measures that you can implement to help us identify this, and then work with the government through public-private partnerships like the illicit virtual asset notification system that we launched initial operational capability of this week, or working with FinCEN, including really incredible information and your suspicious activity reporting, working with OSIP and OFAC that Todd also spoke to. So, and then of course, other regulators and the rest of the interagency law enforcement, especially, to be able to support their efforts. So I just wanted to really foot stomp the fact that you guys are critical partners that the U.S. government is turning to look to make sure that we put measures in place to make sure that cryptocurrency, as well as other avenues, are not the places where these illicit actors can move their proceeds.
Thank you so much to you both. There is no place, on earth with more dedicated career civil servants than the U.S. Treasury Department. I saw that firsthand, and you guys are really leading the charge there. So thank you so much for coming on today. Thank you to the audience, and really thank you for this conversation. As we're sort of building a safer financial system for billions of people, these are the most important conversations to have between the private sector and the government. So thank you so much for coming on today.